Kör vi strax, va? Har du dragit igång? Yes. Hello everyone and welcome to this session, the second day of this conference. My name is Mattias Lindahl and I am professor at Linköping University and also program director of Missouri's. And I will be the chair of this session, this keynote session about the Swedish engineering industry strategy to achieve a resource efficient and circular economy. This session, in this session, we have two very, I would say, good guests. We have Elinor Kruse. She is the director of environmental policy at the Association of Swedish Engineering Industries. We also have James Lundström, head of circular economy at Volvo Cars. And together with these two excellent speakers, we will have a nice chat and we will also open up for some questions later on in this session. So with that said, let's start with you, Elinor, and I will hand it over to you so you can present a little bit more about yourself. So please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Mattias. I will try to share my screen. Just a sec. Share. Okay. So hello everybody, and thank you, Mattias, for having me the opportunity to speak for all of you. You asked me to tell you a little bit about our strategy to achieve a resource efficient and circular economy. And I will try to describe the way we are working at the Swedish Association of Engineering Industries. And first of all, I would like to make a statement for you all, and that is, of course, that urbanization is the driver of economical growth. And therefore, it's so important that cities all over the world really strive towards the climate neutrality, because doing that, they will also ask for more climate efficient solutions from suppliers. And also policymakers can have much more efficient decisions, and also the technology development will go in the right direction. And the second one is really that the different countries and the Europe, of course, really need to have harmonized requirements, and that international standards are important, because then we can have a real industry impact with a global outreach. And then the third point is that Teknikföretagen member companies are in the tech sector, and the technology sector is very global. The value chains are global, the customers are global, and the production sites are global. And for example, I know companies that having forced the production units to be carbon neutral in different countries, and that really have great effects in that region. So I think as a start, these three aspects are very important. As for speaking about circular economy, this is our definition of circular economy stated in 2018. It is, of course, a little bit of utopian, but it's really worth striving for, to having no waste. And Teknikföretagen having members in all the parts of a circular economy, and so this is really our guiding principle. And for me, working with these issues full time, I'm very happy to have the opportunity to do that. I have a third of my time as a close dialogue with members, as for example, James, that will be a speaker later on, to understand their needs, the technology development, the supply chain, and all the challenges that they have. And then 1/3 I lobby in Sweden, and I lobby in Europe, having communication and dialogue with all persons that are really affect policy. And then 1/4 of my time, I'm very active in research and development and innovation, because we see that we really need to facilitate the transition needed. And then I have the opportunity to join the board of the MISTA Greece, and thank you, Mattias, for that. And I'm also working with higher technology level programs, because there need to be research and innovation, both long term and more short term. And by splitting my time in these pie and with these colors, I really get a good opportunity to see the different challenges and try to influence in all the areas. The key drivers that we can see. The first driver is really that people need to change their habits. And that is the most important thing. And everybody of us need to change our habits. But doing that, there are 4 drivers that really facilitate the change of habits. And the first one is research and innovation. And we really need to have a very stable area and stable situation for research and innovation regarding money, regarding project, and regarding collaboration. But what's very important is that in higher education and university, all different educations need to have education in sustainability and environment, because decisions are taking on all kind of persons, not just in technology and environmental areas. So economics and also philosophy, everybody needs to have a ground and level of environmental knowledge. Then digitalization. Digitalization really enables circular economy. We shouldn't have any sharing situation. There's so many new business models that really are a consequence of digitalization. So there is really a need of spread out digitalization. And the third area is the circular product design and new business models. And they will actually lead to increased circularity in many different ways. And the fourth area is that we need to close the material loops. The waste treatment is really of great importance, and we need to have a better collaboration between the waste industry and the technology industry, so that the technology industry could deliver intelligent solutions like artificial intelligence and sensor technology to really facilitate the opportunity to have more separate waste streams. So these 4 drivers is what we see that we will work for. This is a little bit interesting news for you. We made media research in October 2019, and there is a trend line in media, and this is international media, both in Europe and in Sweden, when media started to write much more about circular economy, and that was in January 2018. And the words related to circular economy in international media are plastic. That is the dominated word. Then we have recycling, then we have EU news, waste, and sustainability. The drivers, as we see, are not so much mentioned in international media yet. And then I think it's interesting for people working in research and also people working in industry that in Sweden, if you look at the media situation there, we can see that there are 3 major focus areas regarding circular economy, and that is business models, it is waste disposal, and policy instruments. And if we see who is the agenda setter regarding these issues, it is the Swedish industry. And that includes different corporations, large corporations and small ones. And half of them express the opinions that they share with Teknikföretagen, the Swedish engineering industries, and half of them not. But what's very happy and what's very, very good to see is that the second driver, agenda setter for circular economy is researchers. And that is so important that we're having a factor-based discussion and policy development. So taking this these two actors being so active in media is a very good sign and also an important driver for having new solutions. And as you can see, politicians is very far down in the media. And then a little bit about our national ambitions for a circular economy. There really need to be clear goals about the goal to get circular. A nitty-gritty legislation will never lead to a circular economy. We need to have clear goals. But then policymakers need to be very careful because circular economy creates activities in companies. And activities in companies should be managed by companies. And then, of course, we need to have a great policy for research and innovation and digitalization to create these business opportunities. And two things we need worries about is national provisions, because they really creates distortions of the market and creates administration, and administration doesn't solve environmental problems. And then, of course, we need to have a free trade because different countries are specialized in different things. So we really need to have the possibility to trade, free trade. And then as regard of European policy developments, it's so important with a strong European single market. That will be better for circular economy because circular economy is not about small villages, it's about the globe. And then it's also very important for us that any requirement on a product need to be specific and measurable so that we can make sure that we fulfill all the requirements. We shouldn't have any landfill at all. It's embarrassing that still waste are being landfilled. We shouldn't have that. And then the fourth thing is really the importance in defining waste as a resource, because today you can't even trade with secondary products. You can't really, because it's defined as waste, and then we have a very special legislation. So there are really important things that need to be happen in Europe. And I shouldn't say so much more. I would just let you have the opportunity to read our report. It's getting a little bit old now. It's from 2018. It's possible to download it here. And we have and also you can look at our homepage because we're going to have a new report in autumn. So thank you very much for this introduction I had the opportunity to do, and take care and having a really good discussion now. Thank you, Mattias.
Thank you, Elinor, and you will come back when we have more discussions in a few minutes.
I stopped sharing my screen now.
Yes, and now I would like to hand it over to James to share his presentation. James, shoot.
Yes, thank you, Mattias, and hello, everyone. My name, as Mattias mentioned, is James Lundström. I'm the head of circular economy at Volvo Cars, which is a relatively new position. It's been there for about 2 years. There's two of us working on a corporate level, so we're really a jack of all trades. One day we're discussing how to emphasize recycled plastics in design, and the next time we're talking about how solar panels at a factory in China can help us reduce our CO2 impact. And I think Elinor brought up some very important discussions. One issue we see in the word of change, which circular economy essentially is to many industries, is people have to change, and people are willing to change. People are willing to recycle bottles. People are willing to sort their garbage into different fractions. But when they're doing what is probably their second biggest investment in life after a house, which normally is a car, they become a little more egoistic. They are a little more sensitive to things that are close to their heart, the design, the feeling, the emotions, and are not always as rational as from a sustainability perspective you might want them to be. So we are seeing a huge increase in customer interest in sustainability, but not at the level that we would like to see. And much of the change that is being driven within Volvo Cars today is coming from not necessarily consumer pressure, but an internal will and desire to be a truly sustainable company. And let's see if my computer let me change slide. And I think when you mention Volvo as a car maker, everyone sort of tends to instinctively think about safety. We have been known as the leader of safety for I would say essentially the company was founded. And what has happened since 2 years ago is that when you look at the board of directors, the CEO level, the strategies they are working with, they have put sustainable on the same level as safety. And we say that we commit to the highest level of sustainability. Now, you can always argue about what does the highest level mean, but we're using the same statements when we talk about safety, and that has led us to be clearly defined or seen as the leader of safety within the whole automotive industry. And we're definitely aiming to be on the same level when it comes to sustainability as an automotive producer. That, of course, raises a number of challenges, and I think Elinor touched on some of them. One is, which we just mentioned, how do you measure it? What is circularity in a production industry or in an automotive industry, and how do you compare it with other companies who do different type of priorities? That is one of the things that we work on internally on trying to define in a good way. We also face the challenge that the automotive industry is very global and the supply base is to a certain extent quite common. So being a company that tries to stand out means that you end up being very unique towards suppliers who are working with many other companies at the same time. So this, although it will be a very competitive area, there needs to be a lot of cooperation and there needs to be standardization to help this progress. When we started this journey, which was, well, environmental issues have been there for a long time, but defining the targets as so strict and so challenging, we went and looked at the UN Development Goals for how would they apply to us as an automotive producer. We also made a strong commitment to support the Paris Agreement on CO2. So we're looking at 3 pillars that build up our sustainability. We're looking at climate action, we're looking at circular economy, and we're looking at ethical and responsible stewardship. What we're aiming for in these areas is that Volvo should be a climate neutral company by 2040. And we're not just talking electric vehicles. We're looking at production, we're looking at logistics, inbound and outbound. We're looking at CO2 impact from our suppliers, from the parts they produce, from the spare parts and service we deliver to the end of life phase when we come to recycling. In the same way, we work as a circular business, meaning that, yet again, as Elinor mentioned, no waste should ever go to landfill. We should also be a strong customer of recycled materials. We should design our products that they can not just be shredded and recycled at a lower grade, but where you truly can find closed loop. So where our trash could be essentially raw material source for our next coming products, are a second life or a third life solution for a component that we use that then can be, once it's served its useful lifetime in a car with all the legal restrictions and criteria you have there, you could easily use it for somewhere else. And when it comes to ethical and responsible business, there is less defined targets to look at there, but in wake of those targets, we're saying that we should be recognized as a leader in responsible business. And things we're looking at there is that there should never be a supplier or any operations within a company that pays below what is a reasonable wage, that even if we're working in third world countries, everyone should have good living conditions, they should have good labor conditions. There are a lot of aspects, and these are areas that are still being defined. Since we're focusing on circular economy in this session here, I'll go a little deeper there and then I'll leave the floor open for discussions. We have put our sort of long-term stake down at 2040. But just saying 2040 and then waiting to see what happens will not drive action within the company. So we have sort of interim goals at 2025, and then we will work with these goals at, I would say, a 2 to 4 year steps, depending on the area. So when we're looking at circular materials, which is the first step, we're trying to eliminate waste and we're trying to do better material utilization, which means not having waste in production. Then we're looking at bio-based and recycled materials and increase the usage. And we're looking at, by 2025, to have 25% recycled plastics, 40% aluminum, and 25% steel. As it looks right now, the biggest challenge will be plastics, and issues there is a lot has to do with data. when designing a car, there are very few components that aren't there for a good reason, and there are durability criteria, there are strength criteria, there are surface criteria, and getting good data on recycled material is still a challenge in the industry. We also have some, I would say, almost counterintuitive regulations, such as we have the European Chemical Regulation in REACH, which is a very good thing, but it sets the same very strict requirements on recycled content, which actually increases the cost of recycled material compared to virgin materials. So these are challenges that we're trying to overcome, both through technical activities and also lobbying. Then we're looking very much sort of as the sign that was shown there before of eternity of how can we repair and reuse and prolong the lifetime of components. We already have a multi-million-dollar business in refurbishing and reusing gearboxes, engines, and a number of other components, but that has to expand. And that is a change both in internal operations, in supplier contracts, but also customer perception, that customers see a benefit and not a disadvantage in receiving these components. And then in general, creating better business opportunities regarding parts and car usage. If you look in research, a lot of increasing the value of material is actually increasing the usage of the product. And as most of you might be able to relate to, a car stands still roughly 90% of its life cycle, because you drive to work, from work, you drive to the store, from the store. So by increasing usage, finding better business models, and looking more into selling transport as a service than just selling a car, we hope to increase the utilization of our materials as well. And the building businesses in that area also creates new drivers for how you use materials, which allows us to challenge some of the internal criteria that sometimes still need to be modified to optimize the circularity of our business. So with that introduction and a little insight to what we're doing at Volvo, I would like to hand the word back to Mattias. Thank you for having us, and I look forward to the questions you may have.
Thank you both, Elinor and James, for interesting presentations. Before I have a short discussion now with you, Elinor and James, I also want to mention that we have a Menti. If you want to ask the panel, Elinor and James, any questions, just go to Menti, and then the code is 811849. With that said, let's continue. And I already got some questions. Elinor, would like to hear your reflections about James' presentation. It doesn't sound familiar.
No, but I think, of course, we are working so very close to our member companies, and Volvo is happily one of our members. But what's interesting is to see how circular economy could be more into the details and how it's getting real. And what's interesting to see is that it's really something that is done as a business. Now we're not talking about environment any longer, but the ultimate effect is of course environment. But what we actually is doing, and Volvo show that they are doing, is that they are changing their business model to save the planet. And I haven't really seen that before. And this is a tremendous change in how businesses adapt after the limitations of the planet. And this is new. It has been growing, and then that they really have goals that are measurable. And what is not measurable is not happening. And that, I think, is the greatest challenge that we have from a political point of view, that we need to measure, but we need to measure in a very, very specific way.
I agree. I've seen it also in other companies. But James, maybe you want to comment.
No, I think I can just reiterate what is being said here is that I've been working in environmental product development in different ways for over 20 years. And I've done my fair share of work in the regulatory affairs field as well. And when I started working with environmental subjects at Volvo, I can admit we were about 25 people, and we were more or less seen as missionaries, trying to sort of embrace the masses to follow us with limited success. And we had some very good projects, but I would say from an overall business perspective, this was unique efforts. And now when I come back to the environmental field, there's a tenfold amount of people, there is a tremendous interest, and there is pressure, not from middle management, but from CEO, from board of director levels, that are challenging us in a way that I don't think actually anyone has been challenged in the company before, because they're not just saying, do something good here. They're saying all the things that Elinor is bringing up as well. Make it measurable, transform it into business, and transform it into profitability. And it can be done. We are very confident in our steps forward, but I'm not going to deny in any way that it is challenging, and there is still some, I wouldn't use the term reluctance, but people need help to understand how do they change from what they've been doing for 10, 15, 20 years into finding alternative revenue streams instead of just keep doing the same thing that you've always done. So it's truly a disruptive shift, and they are never easy in any company, no matter what field it is.
It's actually related a little bit to what has been discussed in the sessions today, the closed sessions, and also relate to previous discussions yesterday. The fact that a lot of organizations are actually designed to fit the linear model and with a linear way of thinking, and now that is challenged when we have the more circular thinking, and that could cause problems, but also the way how things are measured. What do you see as the major challenges for companies that want to change from the linear types of business models, the way of thinking, and actually moving towards the new way, new types of business models? Elinor or James?
I could say what I see on a general level. When we talk to the companies, the companies that are strategic, and I mean, I speak with maybe 10 or 15 companies that are working with circular economy on a strategic level, trying really to be transformative. What they say, everybody, is the difficulties when they're really having new business models is to have them in real, from a financial point of view. It's a tremendous change of how to make business and how to get your earnings and how to get the investors believe in that. And that is also something about measurability, and how do you measure profit, and how do you capitalize on new business models from a linear company that is used to have this putting all the products on the market issue. So I think that is what I can see on a general level, and that should be interesting to hear from Volvo. What is I mean, you have been in car sharing for a long time. You have been in renting area for a long time. What do you see in respect of financing?
Yeah, so I think the way I can answer that is, to a large extent, I agree. At the same time, for the last couple of years, we haven't had a single meeting with investors, with insurance companies, with banks, with any discussions regarding mergers and so on, where sustainability is not on top of the list. There is not a single investor that wants to invest large scale that accepts to do anything regarding, or if you are able to prove to them that you are truly working with sustainability. And I'm not going to dig deep into competitors, but one example is when PSA bought Opel and then sued GM because they realized after the contract was signed that they didn't have patents on the sustainability technology that GM had developed that was sold under the Opel brand in Europe. So GM, the main reason PSA went back and sued GM was they didn't have the sustainability platform they were hoping for. And we have not been involved in anything anywhere near that, but any discussion with investor, apart from the simple metrics of profitability, return of sales after tax and those type of things, the next question is, what is your sustainability plan, and prove that it maintains profitability in your company. And so if you can't do that, you're not at the table. You are not discussing with these companies anymore. And if you're a large-scale company, you simply cannot operate without having a very intricate and detailed discussion with your investors.
Elinor, quick response?
No, I think it's this is also a change, and it's also very, very important, because in having the investors and having them having a very clear agenda for sustainability, they will also driving the change for the companies that are followers. Because Volvo, you are not a follower, you are creating sustainability, and then your suppliers are following. But through working with the investors, all the companies that they invest in will be leaders, and then having suppliers as the followers. So I think it's extremely important and hopeful that we have this situation right now.
I can also say I've seen a big trend now. I mean, now it's about business. It's not only about a single thing, like environmental issues. It's about the future of the companies. I would like to bring up some questions from the audience. One question here is, what are the future skills that engineers should bring along to foster the circular economy? Let's start with you, James.
I think, wow, it's a difficult question. You can take different directions, but I would actually keep it a little simple and say we need brilliant and innovative engineers today as we do tomorrow. To create sustainability is sort of, it's one different perspective of a problem. It used to be, how do you make it cheap? How do you make it durable? How do you combine multiple functions or multiple components into one? And now you add one additional aspect. What happens when the car is no longer in use, or when this component has to be replaced? Is there an intrinsic value in it? Is there a second life? Can we do sold as service instead of selling it linearly as a component? I can talk positively about a competitor, or not a competitor, but a supplier, which is Michelin. They are in the commercial business now, looking at not selling the amount of tires. They're selling the amount of miles you can drive, or the number of landings and takeoffs for a plane, for instance, which challenges their internal engineering in a completely different way than they've done before. And this is the same thing here. So we still need our universities to produce brilliant engineers. And it's not a new, unique set of skills. It is continuous innovation, but from different perspectives than before.
Or can you elaborate a little bit?
Yes, because you need to be professional. I think that specialization really are getting more and more specific, and to be really professional, you need to have a core competence. But what I said in my presentation earlier, it's so important that if you are in maths, you need to know what the objective, and therefore all educations really need to have a developed sustainability education in through the planetary limitations and things like that, and chemicals, because they need to have the opportunity and possibility to talk with the drivers of the sustainability agenda, to be able to adjust what they are doing from a circular economy and environmental perspective. So that is important.
Thank you. Elinor, in your presentation, you mentioned that the single EU market is crucial for supporting circularity. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? And James, do you share this opinion?
Let's let Elinor start.
Can you repeat, please?
Yeah, in your presentation, you mentioned that the single European Union market is crucial for
the internal market.
Yes.
Yeah, the internal market is of great importance, because if the technology sector, our members, I mean, Sweden is a very, very small market. We are 8 million persons. And being a company of a global brand, you can't really, the products that we put on the Swedish market is not enough for a sustainable company. We need to put products on the European market or global market. And therefore, we need to have the same requirements on all markets. And the only way to have that is to have an internal market with stable regulations and harmonized regulations. And therefore, if we have a very strong European policy saying that they should have unique and common requirements, we can have them all over the world. And then the companies need to adjust to different regulations in different countries. And that is very important, because if you need to adjust your product for different countries, it's going to be really complicated. So it's quite simple as I see it.
James?
Yes, sorry, I have a phone in the background that there's a beeping noise. Europe is our second biggest market, followed after China. But Europe has historically, and I would say, even though China is challenging on them, Europe has always been sort of the global leader of environmental and sustainable subjects. They were the first with the recycling regulation. They were first with heavy metal bans. They were the first to have a clear chemical policy, and many other countries have followed. And I think Europe has this golden opportunity to help its industry to find profitability and sustainability. And when you do that, you will, my firm belief is, you will end up with a lower overall product cost and a higher profitability for a company once you go through this disruptive shift, which it is for many companies, which will increase and gain competitiveness for those companies who are based in Europe. So I do feel that there is and a strong need for a continued push and support for European industry in terms of sustainability, because if Europe doesn't do it, somebody else will.
Thank you. We are running a little bit out of time, so we have like 2.5 more minutes, approximately, maybe 3. And actually, a little bit a related question. Unfortunately, we can't take all your questions that have popped in from the audience. But is what you said, James, about sustainability not mainly risk management? 2040 for CE implementation is very far away. Would it be possible to form an alliance of major car companies that together push for CE and sustainability? And related to actually your previous work when it comes to IMDS, what do you think about that? You can maybe explain IMDS as well.
That is, yes, I was a member for about 10 years in the industry and harmonizing how the automotive industry worked on material regulations. I think to a certain extent, yes, when it comes to harmonization, standardization, metrics, and targets, then in the end, just as it was with IMDS, the IMDS was a tool to allow companies to profile themselves in different ways on how to work with hazardous materials and how to work with recyclability. And I think Volvo and a few others really took that chance, and the results sort of speak for themselves. The same opportunity stands here. There needs to be a good platform, and I think there needs to be policy involvement from the European Union in creating the fundamentals. Then let the industry compete, because not only Volvo, but many other OEMs are understanding that overall this is a business benefit, but it takes change, and it takes change throughout the whole company, not just the top level management.
If we modify the question a little bit, what do you think about this type of creating alliances, Elinor, among companies within the same business?
There is always this about competition rules that is out of what I'm working with. But what we can see is that the technology development is very quick, and the companies really knows that there is another company that they need to be able to develop. And what I can see is that companies collaborate much more and quicker and share secret information between each other, because they develop common products, and they more like business. They are more in sustainable business collaboration in different kind of projects, and then they separate say out and they go in. So it's in all areas that collaboration, at least in Sweden, is moving the technology and the transformation. But I'm really not an expert in the regulations and barriers and for collaboration, but it's very important with different kind of collaborations.
Okay, then we have actually running out of time. So my idea was to ask this as the last question, but this is a question to, I would say, to everyone listen to this presentation. I think it's an excellent question. When is the business truly circular? It's a very philosophical question in many, many ways. By that, I would like to thank you, James and Elinor, for your participation in this session. And by that, I would like to close it. And we will soon start the next session. That will be, sorry, I need to look into my program. It will be next keynote, Circular Economy Needs a System Perspective. And that will be by Wijkman, and the chair will be Conny Bakker. And it will start in just a few seconds. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Elinor, James, once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mattias.
Sure.
Hello.
You can start.
I think, it's Raya? Okay, thanks. I would very much, my name is Conny Bakker. I would very much like to introduce Anders Wijkman to you. I'm honored to introduce him. He sent me his CV, and it's a long and distinguished career that he has had, and I will highlight a few of his many accomplishments here. Anders has been in the past a policy director of the UN Development Programme and Assistant Secretary General of the UN. He was a member of the Swedish Parliament and of the European Parliament, focusing on climate change, environment and health, and humanitarian affairs. He is currently co-president of the Club of Rome, together with Professor Ernst van Weizsäcker. He is a member of the International Resource Panel of the UN, and he chairs Circular Sweden. Also, Anders has authored many reports and books pertaining to sustainability issues, among which a follow-up of the famous Club of Rome's report, The Limits to Growth, which we all know. And this follow-up is called Come On, Capitalism, Short-Termism, Population, and the Destruction of the Planet. And these are all topics we have come across in this conference, I think. So for his keynote today, Anders told me, I will listen carefully during the conference and then decide what my main points will be. Systemic approaches will definitely be a point, and the barriers to change another. So for those of you listening in, please make sure to use menti.com for asking questions and use code 811723, which you can also find on the IS4CE homepage. And now over to you, Anders. I'm truly looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Conny. Thank you very much. And thank you to the organizers for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to share some of my experience after having worked on resource efficiency issues for quite a number of years. I will focus on a few issues where I think we need to focus a lot of attention and which involve challenges for the new society. Firstly, I will discuss the world after COVID-19 and the opportunities opening up because of all the stimulus programs. Secondly, I will reflect a bit on the recognition that even if we are at an inaugural meeting, that is to say, the inauguration of this society, the issues we are dealing with are not new at all, and we have to understand why progress has been so slow. We also need to understand and proactively address the many barriers to change. The problems that we face are, moreover, also being more difficult because of the lacking of a clear definition of circularity, and as a consequence from that, what indicators to use. Finally, I will touch upon the important role of cities in the promotion of circular economy. And there I will highlight the risk for fragmented approaches. Let me start by saying that we are meeting at a time of crisis. Governments all over the world are struggling to understand how to rebuild their economies after COVID-19. However, the pandemic is but one of many serious risks we are facing. In this globalized and integrated world, we are challenged as well by climate change, the rapid decline of many vital ecosystems, and indeed the loss of biodiversity. Furthermore, we cannot ignore the risks posed by the financial system, with debt levels that are approaching 350% of global GDP. Another major challenge is rising inequalities and large sections of the population in many countries being left behind, which leads to lower levels of trust in society and the rise of populism. Ultimately, according to many experts, democracy is at risk. I could go on. There are more risks, but I'll stop there. Governments around the world have responded swiftly to the COVID-19 crisis with stimulus packages that have already gone far beyond 12 trillion US dollars, 12,000 billion US dollars. But the crisis ain't over. Additional huge sums of public money will be required, and this means that the recovery measures must be carefully designed with clear long-term objectives so as to tackle some of the other risks that are looming on the horizon, not least climate change. Listening to leading economists such as Jost Stiglitz and Nick Stern assert that green recovery packages would offer much higher rates of return, more short-term jobs, and long-term cost savings than traditional fiscal stimulus. But it is far from sure that the majority of governments will follow this kind of advice. In fact, according to a recent Green Stimulus Index report, more than a quarter of the stimulus spending implemented so far by some 20 major economies is likely to cause substantial environmental damage. However, some important decision makers are recognizing the green imperative. The recovery plan presented by the European Commission is one example. It aims to accelerate the shift to a zero carbon or low carbon economy and restore biodiversity. It builds on the thinking in the Green Deal presented in December last year. At least 25% of the recovery plan aims at climate-friendly measures. The rest of the package will be guided by a principle of doing no harm. The main priorities that have been set are building efficiency, clean technology investment, low carbon vehicles, land use, and just transition. And as Martin Stuczny emphasized yesterday, resource efficiency is one of the main objectives, both of the Green Deal and the recovery package. And it seems as if this time, the European Commission, after many years of struggling with the concept of the circular economy, has the right priorities. The main action considered will be, in the language of Walter Stahel, to keep the value and utility of manufactured goods as long as possible. So the Circular Economy Action Plan represents a real opportunity to start moving in the right direction and will require contributions from the scientific community and from this society. We are gathered here for the inauguration of the International Society for the Circular Economy. The issues we pursue, that is to say, the metabolism of the industrial society, are by no means new. We have been reminded of that several times during the conference. Conny, you alluded to the Limits to Growth report. Almost 50 years have passed since the launch, but its key message is still valid, namely that the combination of resource depletion and pollution, if unchecked, will ultimately bring the global economy down. Regretfully, few decision makers listened to the Club of Rome at the time, not to speak of leading economists. The human footprint, both in terms of the atmosphere and vital ecosystems and biodiversity, is growing as we speak. Martin referred to the International Resource Panel with its recent report, Grow to 2019, where it estimates that the extraction and production of materials make up for roughly half of the carbon emissions in the world and 80% of the loss of biodiversity. And demand for the materials is increasing rapidly. The world is expected to build as much urban infrastructure till 2050 as we have built until today. And ladies and gentlemen, if this happens with today's materials and today's technologies, we are toast. We can forget about the Paris climate goals. Hence the need for a different approach to material use. A major problem is that we discuss all the challenges facing us within the conventional economic paradigm, where production growth in quantitative terms is the main objective. That system worked well when the world population and the economy was small. In the book referred to by Conny from Ernst von Weizsäcker and myself, Come On, we call this the empty world. Now we live in the full world with a population close to 8 billion and an economy that is more than 10 times larger than after World War II. In reality, we face a systemic crisis. Everything is linked to everything. To mainly measure societal progress in terms of growth of GDP will not result in the kind of society people wish for. The pandemic, not least, has shown us the narrowness of this thinking. We need better metrics that measure the well-being of the population, including healthy ecosystems and a stable climate. And we need metrics that help us to assess material productivity and help us distinguish between material stocks and flows. We don't have that today. One thing that is positive is that awareness among people about the challenges we face is increasing. And I believe, in fact, that the pandemic has helped lead the way. People are much more open to change than before. My hope is that this goes for conventional economists as well, because until now, conventional economists have been reluctant to reconsider their traditional models and thinking, where nature and access to natural resources seem to have been taken for a given. That may have worked in the empty world when the prevailing economic model was developed and established, but it doesn't work in the full world. Yet, very little has changed both in the models and in the training of economists. To quote my friend Cameron Hepburn from the Institute for New Economic Thinking, he recently said, the education of economists take place as if the last 40 to 50 years didn't happen. Give me a break. So one of the key areas for exploration and study for the new society must be the reform of conventional economics. The circular economy as a concept has been around for decades, partly under different names and concepts. While the general principles are relatively easy to understand, there is, as of today, no generally accepted definition. It is rather a metaphor for a number of activities aiming at using resources more efficiently. But even a metaphor needs some rigor. The downsides of not having a clear definition are obvious, including the difficulty to develop and agree upon circularity indicators. As Martin stressed yesterday, we tend to measure the wrong things in the economy, meaning that circularity in all its forms is not accounted for. In the absence of a clear definition, most people tend to believe that the circular economy is about recycling. For quite obvious reasons. The European Commission has spent the last 5 years promoting recycling of waste and residue materials as if that alone would lead to a circular production model. It will not. The Circularity Gap Report issued yearly since a few years at the World Economic Forum is another example. Countries are mainly judged depending on the level of recycling. By doing so, product life extension, which is a key element in a circular economy, or the reconditioning of products, or the turning of products into services, are not looked upon as contributing to circularity. Such an indicator is hardly convincing. Not that I'm against recycling, but it is only one of several R's in the equation, and it has to be put in context. More important are concepts like reduce, reuse, refurbish, and remanufacture. In today's production system, a significant part of the recycled materials are only suitable for downcycling into lower grade products. Moreover, while metals and glass can be recycled on and on and on again, materials such as textiles, plastics, and paper can only be recycled a few times. Last but not the least, even with high recycling rates, the loss of material value in the process is significant. In fact, the way most products are designed today, the loss of value after first single use is substantial. A study by Material Economics in Sweden in 2018 showed that billions of euros were thrown away in Sweden yearly because of that. So another important issue to grapple with for the society will be how to define circularity and what indicators to use. In her keynote yesterday, Tina Bansal brought to the fore some key barriers why the business community is not embracing the circular economy concept more readily. Let me expand on this a bit, because I do think such barriers are crucially important when the aim is to move the circular economy agenda forward. Firstly, raw materials have historically been abundant and cheap. Secondly, producers have rarely paid for the external costs involved in material extraction and production, which has led to a situation where virgin materials are most often less expensive than secondary materials. The productivity focus in the economy and by the economists has been on labor costs, not on materials. Business models have favored short-termism, high throughput, and short product lives. Product design has not been aiming at reuse and recycling. And I've talked to a lot of designers, and they've told me we were never asked to do this. As was said by the Volvo representative a couple of minutes ago, quality criteria for secondary materials are mostly lacking. Another point is that many products include banned substances and are difficult to reuse and recycle. Another point is, of course, that global markets and supply chains make it difficult to close the loops. And there are finally very few examples of governments introducing incentives for material efficiency, unlike what is the case for energy efficiency. So there we have a long list of issues, and most of them have to be addressed by the political sector. Some of the key policy measures to consider would be a tax shift, lowering taxes on labor and increasing taxes on resource use. In my country, Sweden, 60% of tax revenue comes from taxing labor, only 5% comes from taxing energy, resource use, and pollution. Secondly, remove VAT on all reused materials. Thirdly, introduce design criteria across the board. That is to say, products should be designed for reuse and recycling. Fourthly, public procurement must lead the way and be proactively used to promote circularity in all its aspects. We should also recognize the importance of cross-cutting policies. We should make resource efficiency a priority in climate mitigation policies. We should stimulate skill development, launch innovation programs for circularity. They are still few and far between. We should explore the feasibility of introducing the extended producer liability as a concept across the economy. It was referred to yesterday by Martin. It's a very interesting way of dealing with the issues. We should explore policy measures to address the rebound effect. I don't have time to go into it, but this idea that we can just depend on resource efficiency and do the trick is utterly naive. We need to balance the rebound effects. Otherwise, resource efficiency will just lead to more consumption and more material use. We have to recognize the need for multi-level policy interventions. And finally, as I already said, we have to complement today's flow-based metrics with metrics that assess the stocks. Finally, I come to the cities. Cities around the world have been increasingly proactive in the field of circularity. Organizations like IS4CE2020, OECD, Ellen MacArthur Foundation, Climate Kick, GEL, ICLAI, and Citra have provided leadership. We have seen the emergence of numerous examples of promising practices in key areas like building and construction, mobility, energy, waste management, food waste, and nature-based solutions. Networking and experimentation have played key roles. Cities offer, in fact, a major opportunity to drive systemic change in the economy. From scaling demand, they can evolve, becoming the largest market driven by policy incentives, such as procurement, regulations, and standards. And by being the problem owners, that is to say, facing high levels of material throughput, of waste, pollution, and carbon emissions, cities have the opportunity to drive change through innovation along the value chain and design processes in all areas from policy and infrastructure to products and services. One of my hats today is not only the Club of Rome, but also Climate Kick, the largest public-private innovation partnership in the EU, focusing on climate innovation to mitigate and adapt to climate change. Circularity is one of our main priorities. We were set up by the European Union in 2010, and we have presently more than 400 partners from the business sectors, universities, and cities and regions. Over the years, we have learned that a business as usual or supply-focused approach to innovation runs the risk of bias towards single-point solutions of an incremental nature. Such solutions are unlikely to address climate change at the speed and scale we need. If I turn to cities and their way of promoting circularity, I also discern the same tendency as we have seen in terms of climate mitigation in general, namely a fragmented approach, vertical interventions, single-point solutions. There are exceptions, but that's generally the rule. Many of these efforts are worthy and do bring about improvements in material efficiency as well as reductions in pollution. And such solutions rarely achieve systemic change. That is to say, the transformation needed. The situation is, by the way, not improved by the way city governance is organized, most often in parallel silo-based structures. In Climate Kick, we have chosen to position ourselves as an orchestrated innovation ecosystem that connects demand and supply in catalyzing transformational systemic change, working closely with demand-side actors and those with high ambition for change. We work with problem owners to deliver a transformation service that can help cities, regions, countries, businesses unlock the fast change and large-scale change that is now needed. It takes the form of, in our case, deep demonstrations, each anchored by one or more problem owners. A few examples of what we are doing is the following. We recently had an agreement struck with the Slovenian government to help the country move from a linear to a circular production model. We are involved in altogether 5 sectors of the economy. Our cooperation has, by the way, led to several other member states showing interest to do the same. Another example is an agreement with the regional government of Upper Silesia to help the region to transform from a coal-based economy. And another is, of course, the agreements with altogether 15 European cities, among them Madrid, Milan, Vienna, Malmö, and Krakow, to help them decarbonize within 10 to 15 years under the motto of healthy and clean cities. Our focus is broad, smart energy systems, retrofitting of buildings, smart mobility, nature-based solutions. These were just a few examples of the deep demos that we have initiated. Once up and running, the idea is to use the results for upscaling and outscaling. That is to say, sharing the practices with other regions and cities, and indeed influence governance and policy. Our systemic approach is increasingly met with keen interest from the EU Commission, member state governments, regional governments, and cities. And we believe only systemic approaches can bring about the necessary transformation to a low-carbon circular economy. So in the area of research and innovation, this means that Europe needs to co-create multidisciplinary systemic solutions at a much greater pace than hitherto. It's a tall order for Horizon Europe, and I suggest for this society. To conclude, while the main motive behind the move towards a circular economy is related to the effects on the environment, there are several strong co-benefits. The most obvious is the material values to be captured and the money saved. There is a lot of waste in today's system. In addition, there are a multitude of social objectives to be harnessed. Net employment will, according to many studies, be positive. Entrepreneurial activity is likely to flourish in areas like repair, maintenance, refurbishment, and remanufacturing, in the sharing economy, and not least in turning products into services. Social cohesion is likely to benefit. An economy built increasingly on the offering of services rather than products and on the concept of a sharing economy will result in a large number of interactions between citizens that are likely to enhance quality of life and, more specifically, the level of trust. So, ladies and gentlemen, we ought to have a bright future ahead of us, provided we dare challenge both the incumbents, conventional economics, and dare leave behind vertical and silo-based structures in favor of systems design and systemic approaches. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Anders. Thank you. It was an amazing bird's eye view of all the research challenges that are facing us as the Society for Circular Economy. For those of you listening in, we still have a few minutes to have Q&A, and you can use menti.com. I'll just repeat the code 1811723, and we already have a few questions in. So, Anders, if that's okay with you, I'll just launch into a question. Fine. From the audience. Yeah, good. So the question is, where are the major research gaps in systems thinking towards a circular economy in the next 5 years? So it's a big question. Where are the major research gaps in systems thinking towards a circular economy in the next 5 years?
Well, I think that we are poorly organized, first of all, because the scientific community, universities, academia in general, is in fact very silo-based. There are thousands of disciplines and sub-disciplines all over the world, but there are very few programs aiming at understanding the whole and bringing things together. So I think we need a lot of efforts in the academic community. And the interesting thing is that whenever I attend conferences and talk about this, people tend to agree. But when they go back to their university or their academic institution, they are constrained or confined in their silo or in their vertical structure. That's where they have their appointment as a professor or whatever. That's where they get their budget, etc. So I think this will require almost like a revolution in universities and scientific institutions. Then more specifically, I think what is very much needed is to help each other to look for synergies and trade-offs between different goals and objectives. If you look at the Sustainable Development Goals agenda, there is a tendency to try to meet one goal at a time. That's not going to work. We need to understand the synergies, and we need to define much better how we can work together. So that's the best answer I can give in a few minutes.
Nope, sounds good to me. I have another question. You said during your talk that people, due to the COVID, I liked the fact that you brought in the whole COVID crisis, actually. You said due to this whole crisis, people are now more open for change, it seems. So how can we harness this? Do you have any suggestions or ideas?
Well, I think the most important thing is now to make sure that all the recovery money is not spent to go back to normal, but rather to build back better. And I'm very, very encouraged by the European Commission, because what they have put on the table is really to build back better. When I look at Mr. Trump, it's entirely the opposite. He is spending a lot of money to bring back to normal polluting industries. And he's even relaxing environmental standards and regulation. So these are two opposites. Within the European Union, you have member states who are also pursuing this Build Back Better strategy. France has done a lot already. I heard signs of Germany, etc. So I think this in the short-term perspective, this is very, very important.
Yeah.
And by all means, use the pandemic as an example that many years ago we were told about the risks, but we didn't do anything.
And we have maybe also,
yeah, we have risk in other areas, in other sectors, and we have to go from this short-termism to a more long-term perspective and be ready to spend money to increase resilience and to reduce the risks. And I think the pandemic is a perfect example what could have been prevented and which wasn't prevented.
Yeah. So one final question, maybe. Throughout your long career, have you ever come across a perfect storm like we are currently experiencing with all these different stresses on the planet at the moment, including pandemics?
No, as a matter of fact, I do give a speech quite often, and the title is The Perfect Storm, because we are in the perfect storm. So I agree with you. What I didn't touch upon was the exponential technology dimension, with all its opportunities, but also with quite serious risks. And the fact that decision makers don't really understand what's going on. They are so far away, and we would need policy frameworks to guide technology in the right direction and to help the sustainability and the circularity agenda. That's not really happening. And it will not happen by itself, and it will not happen from a business community that most often is very short-term in nature and normally doesn't earn revenue by addressing public goods. So we need cooperation between the public sector and the private sector. And I think it can be done, it should be done, but we need incentives, we need policy frameworks, just as we need for climate.
Thank you very much, Anders. I think I should hand over back to Mattias now for the closing discussion, which will be hosted by Walter Stahel. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Hello, everyone, and we will be back in 15-20 seconds. Some cameras.
Okay, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. I'm Walter Stahel, and I'm taking you through the final panel discussion on the presented papers. We have 6 people presenting the conclusions of 12 sessions. And I cannot see anybody, but I suppose you are all there. I would like to ask you 2 questions. What was the session about, or the sessions about which you chaired? And secondly, what did you find of interest you would like to share with us? Now, could I call on Katie? I can't see anybody on my screen.
So Katie won't be joining for this session, but she actually sent me an email with her key insights from her session. So I'm happy to kind of feed that back into this discussion.
Yes, could you please?
Yeah, sure. So Katie Whalen, her first session was on business models. It was session number 1. And what she says in her reflections is that there was a discussion around literature and consistency in language and definition, and that's a barrier for implementation of the business models. Katie does mention in her email to me that she disagrees and that she thinks that there are already a variety of frameworks that are very helpful and that reveal a lot of insights in this space and that can help with the implementation of circular business models and circular business model innovation. there are also a lot of existing tools and methods that the panelists discussed, and it does address a gap between like research and the real world. So there was consensus on that this should be developed further, and that there were more tools and methods necessary to apply the thinking into practice. So that was our first session on business models. So the second one that she hosted was on consumer behavior. And the conclusion was that some factors that influence customers' willingness to accept circular goods and services is to focus on product, service, price point, convenience, and availability. It's a focus on a consumer knowledge about production and assumptions about the products, whether it's clean or not. And then also incentives designed into the system that will encourage them or incentivizes them to purchase, for example, discount or take back type of systems. So those are the insights that I can share from her session. I hope that's useful input. Back to you, Walter.
Thank you very much, Emma. Maybe you can continue with your sessions on design and fast-moving consumer goods, because that seems to be fit in with the consumer behavior of Katie.
Yeah, for sure. So during the session on design, so these were both today. During the session of design, we kind of started off with this consensus of that there are a lot of perspectives and topics really like addressed currently in the design community, and that there are a lot of different takes on things. So for example, half of the panelists had a very technical type of topic that they were addressing, and the other half were addressing topics around like the social aspects, and also the responsibility of the consumer and consumer behavior. So that was an observation from basically like, you know, how much they have in common, and that design is actually a really broad topic. And that sometimes that discussion is a bit of a gray area if you come from so many different topics. Another thing that we discussed was the role and responsibility of the designer. So you have like the saying, like everyone is a designer, but what does that actually mean? And what is their responsibility in the transition to a more circular economy? So that's some of the insights of the design session. And then if we look at the fast-moving consumer goods session, so we actually started off by quite a few insights on how the COVID-19 pandemic actually like kind of teased out like that emphasis on the social aspects of, you know, these circular solutions in this space. And we also had a few observations on that, like the discussion around fast-moving consumer goods is very often centralized around like how it has environmental, like if you do it right, that you can have environmental benefits, and it has a very environmentally focused discussion with it. So how can we bring that social element back into that a bit more? And what are the implications of that, and how can that actually be much more integrated together, that you're not just talking about environment or on the other hand social, but that you're talking about that in an integrated approach through the circular economy discussion. So those are some of the insights of these sessions.
Thank you, Emma. Then let's move to Sonja van Dam. Are you Sonja?
Sonja is not in the meeting, so it's only Emilia and Mariana and Ken as well.
Okay, then let's move to Emilia. She chaired session 3 on systemic perspectives, something we have just heard from Anders Wijkman, and session 10 on products, components, and materials.
Right, yes, thank you, Walter. I'm going to try to give a short intro to the discussions that we had, because it was, of course, quite a lot. I was happy to have this session on the systems perspectives, because it seems, it's a theme that runs through the conference, and it's a very important one, of course. In there, we had some, we discussed theories of change. We discussed frameworks for guiding innovation processes on a systemic level. We discussed challenges and barriers, on a systemic level. And I think one of the key things that we were discussing was, how do you manage this kind of transitions and innovation processes without trying to control them? And I think that's part of this whole systems perspective, right? To kind of let the system unfold dynamically, while somehow still getting it somehow where we want it to go. So I think this is kind of for me, an interesting insight to try to, how do we make all these theory actionable? How do we find these intervention points? Creating these enabling conditions. So it all sounds great, but how do we actually do it? So I think that was the kind of discussions that we had, and it was very, very nice and insightful. And for session 10, that was product components and materials. It actually fits quite nicely as a follow-up on the systems perspective, because there we had more clear cases from different industries, but the challenges were also on quite a systemic level. We can think of like it's a system in the system, right? And we had to also there, there are many things influencing one another. So we talked about these cases. We also talked about reuse of digital products and how that can be managed. Also, there was one paper on LCA in the circular economy, which also spurred some interesting discussions. Yeah, I think those would be my main insights.
Thank you, Emilia. So who is the other session chair that is present?
That would be me. Hello.
Marianna, yes. Hello.
So I had two sessions. The one was about policy for a circular economy, and the second one was about institutions and organizations for a circular economy. And well, a lot of the, first of all, we discussed the importance of policy packages, which I think everybody here can relate to. And then we also discussed a little bit about how policies are centered on specific sectors, such as building materials or water, or or consumer goods or white goods, whereas there's also another level to them, which is perhaps cities, and how that adds a different, how do you deal with the different policies for cities, and how do that relate to sectors, and where the complexity lies, and how those two relate to each other. So we had some discussions about that. Another one was very much about synergy between policies and then counterproductiveness, and how to actually get into consideration during policy making, which is really important because policies interact with each other. And to do that, not only within a specific sector, but across sectors. We had a discussion which people were not all on the same, had different opinions on, about whether we are moving towards more command and control. Because the papers that had done actual research looking at what sort of policy interventions and mixes we need, there was quite a bit on suggestions about command and control. I'm not going to go into details, but also there was this thing that you need to build up through informational policies, through voluntary policies. You need to build up a context where you can make more progressive policies, because right now the best policies that you could make, you can't actually make them because there won't be the acceptance there. So we are very much focusing on second level, suboptimal policies. Of course, the role of public procurement was brought up. And then we had a very, very interesting discussion about indicators. and how that there isn't enough evaluation of the existing policies, and there aren't appropriate indicators to do that. And then there was a paper which was very much being critical about a specific indicator, in-depth study showing the problems with water productivity. So I think I've covered, and just one last point in that, the importance of design and the eco design directive, and coming back and designing appropriately from the beginning, and how a lot of policies still focus on waste. But then I can relate back to what the previous keynote was speaking about, that we miss out on the policies which will actually extend the lifetime of the original product, so reuse policies, and how we need to see more happening there, and that together with the eco design. The second group, the second session, which I had, was about organizations and institutions. And here the discussion was extremely interesting. It was about the individual, and then the institutional context, and then the organization. So it was very much about how to achieve change management, how to use change management within the organization, how that needs to align with what is happening on the institutional context, and really very much the role of the individual to push change. It's there was, I can say there's quite a bit of consensus in the group that it really needs to start from individuals. But then it was a bit of a discussion about a chicken and egg situation. What is happening first? Is it the individuals that are creating the changes? The change is created in the individuals, and then how do you actually get this change going? And how do you work? Somebody had done, one of the papers was about the institutional context, and how effective institutions actually support and foster circular economy. But how, yeah. So obviously there's a context there which is supporting as well. That's about as much as I have to say about that. Yes.
Thank you, Marianna. So I guess you can hear me. Okay. I think to come back to what Anders Wijkman said in his speech just before, that the systemic approach is throughout the whole story. It's in policy making, because of course we do make policies to protect the environment, or we do policies to promote labor or promote trade, but there isn't really a policy or a vision of a policy that covers everything. And then we have the global versus local, the technology, the material research, what I call circular sciences. Technologies are global. It's a global competition, whereas the product life extension is governed by the owner users of the product, of the object, of the buildings, and so therefore it is local and bottom up. And one of the tricks to overcome this top-down, bottom-up that Emilia also mentioned, I don't know if anybody knows the carbon tax in Switzerland. Switzerland and British Columbia and Canada have the highest carbon taxes, and yet we are a direct democracy. So we can overthrow any decision by the government. So the trick the government used is that the carbon taxes are on any fuel consumption, but the monies don't go into the public till, the monies are distributed back to the population per capita. Everybody gets the same amount. So that in a sense, the people that consume a lot of fuel and pay a lot of carbon tax get much less, whereas the people that live in a very simple house and drive a bicycle, they get a lot of money. But the money is not, we have a mandatory health insurance, so the money is not given out in cash, the money is given out as a reduction of your health insurance premiums. So I think we need also in policy making, we need tricks to how to motivate people, because you need a majority of people that are obviously in favor, at least in a democracy. Then the sector-specific policy silos, I think the situation is very different in cities and rural areas. In rural areas in Sweden or France, you cannot live without a car, because simply there isn't, especially in France, there is no public transport in rural areas. Whereas in cities, you have very highly developed public transport. But cities are extremely vulnerable with regard to electricity, to power cuts. Because the whole thing about high-rise buildings and cities, elevators, underground trains, you need to guarantee a continued power supply. Whereas in rural areas, electricity is much less important because you always have other ways to provide light. You probably have a fireplace, you can heat, you have a kitchen fire, you can light the fire outside. So how to design policies that cover the cities and the rural areas and make everybody happy. Also in rural areas, normally people are much more closer to the environment and also closer to the circular economy. They repair things themselves. They do whatever they can to feed themselves. Whereas in a city, it's very difficult to plant your vegetables on a balcony, or even, well, you have to repair cafes, but most people have lost the capability of repairing things. So what are the other topics that were discussed? The role of designers in transition to a circular economy. My position is very simple, that most designers work as servants of manufacturing industry. And manufacturing industry still uses mostly the policy of the business model of selling goods. And after the point of sale, it's the owner-user is in control. So the designer has no influence on the owner-user. He can design a perfect product, but if it's abused or vandalized, then designer is helpless. And this is what happened also with the sharing economy that Anders mentioned. In Paris, the Autolib, a perfect sharing concept of small electric vehicles, went bankrupt because of vandalism and abuse by the user. The cars, there was nothing wrong with the design, but the user killed the whole thing. Same with electric scooters that have a economic break-even point of 6 months, but they have an actual life of 3 months before they end up in the river or somewhere else. The consumer behavior, and that is maybe the key issue in also the product life extension, but also in the product use. Of course, the topics that were mentioned, product availability, information, but this for me is a bit the consumer shying away from his own responsibility, because the consumer has no liability and responsibility is something very flexible. So maybe one of the trick of bottom up, top down is that the bottom up rule that could be imposed if the policymakers have the courage is a full liability of the owner for what he's doing and of the producer of materials or products for their products. And so instead of trying to solve the problems by more and more detailed policies or legislation, try to move the responsibility, the liability back to the people who are in control.
Walter?
Yes,
Hi.
Ken?
Yeah, excellent. And I really get that, but I was wondering what the people on menti.com might be asking.
Yes, I don't see that, I'm afraid.
Don't you? Well, you have the link. Perhaps.
I should have switched it on before, but
yeah. So I will take that link, and you carry on with your reflections, and I'll pick up some questions.
Okay.
I have a question. Who should have the liability? You're saying so the company should have the liability, or who should be responsible?
Well, the liability for the manufactured products should be with the manufacturer. So he designs the thing, he chooses the materials, and if he knows the products will come back to him, then he will either put value into the product so that somebody else can recycle or reuse it, or he will make sure it comes back. And this already works for companies that are selling products as a service, because then they retain the ownership. Yes.
So, but I'm just thinking that if the companies have total ownership of the material, they'll basically become material banks.
Yes.
And that will make them really almighty in a way, because now, I don't know, it's just a thought that occurs to me.
No, because there is another trick called license to mine. The nation states that have the mining industry, they could use the mining industry as a service, but then the molecules and atoms that are refined remain property of the nation state that then rents these molecules to the manufacturing industry. And then the manufacturing industry has to pay rent until they bring back the molecules, which means they have to make sure they know where their products are, and that they can only do that if they rent the products or lease them, whatever. But it would change the whole economy in the sense that everything would be in a cycle, in a loop, and everybody would make money from the rent and have to return whatever products or materials if he no longer needs it, in order not to pay rent, give it back. Ken?
Yeah, I picked up a few of these questions for the panel. So could I give you one or two of them?
Yes, please.
Here's a question. Do you expect the 1 million EV battery charging points to be installed in Europe under the Green Deal funding to be designed for remanufacturing? It's quite a specialist question in a way, but I don't know if anybody on the panel has any thoughts about that.
Well, if you read Mr. Timmermans' statement in front of the European Parliament, he specifically mentioned green hydrogen, what I call a circular energy, because then you can use the distribution system you already have with fuel stations. The problem with we are all for electric mobility, but if you use batteries, you will have a huge battery waste problem in a couple of years, because batteries have a life of about 20 years, technical life. And of course, not only the car batteries, but also we already have the smartphone battery problem. So we can't solve the battery problem at the moment, at least, recycling. If we move to hydrogen, then we would avoid the battery problem, and we avoid the recharging stations, because
that's a very interesting take on that one. I hadn't seen that one coming, Walter. Another question, I think, if we can make it general to the panel, because it's a very broad question. What in the sessions has been brought up to be the major enabler for circular economy, and what's the major challenge? I'm not sure we can land on one thing, but it's a great question in a way. And if you will permit, Walter, we'll bring in the other panelists.
Yes,
on
absolutely.
on
absolutely. They should answer.
Yeah, they should answer that one, because it's a really tough one. I don't want to answer it.
So I really think that we need to look at circular economy as not just a silver bullet. Like it's not just an idea, it's like a wider concept. And I think in practice, like for example, like technology might be global and quite universal, but solutions are very local and very specific. So if you say like, you know, the one big enabler, or if you could change one big thing in policy, like there's not just one thing. Like imagine a circular economy in, for example, Latin America versus somewhere like, for example, in Scandinavia. It will work in a different way because it's highly cultural, and it needs to be implemented, you know, within society. So what is the main enabler? Like, I think when we start thinking about it as, you know, how does this actually apply to my local region? And what are the key enablers for, you know, to ensure that this happens on, you know, within the context that you as a person also live. So it's not just a silver bullet, it's something very specific. I don't know how the other panelists feel about that.
Mariana?
I think I just want to relate to something one of the participants said, and I think he was from Mexico. I'm not 100% sure, but I think so. And he was saying that when they were trying to have a discussion within the local community about some actions that needed to be taken, it only started making sense when the priest came, because he could act as a facilitator between the groups of people. And this was, you know, and because we have a discussion about how much language affects how individuals act and how they behave and how they express what they're talking about. And I just thought that was so interesting that it started working when the priest came, which is, as it says in itself, I'm coming in to say, yes, you're right. There are things which are global and there are things which are very local. And then there can perhaps only be one solution, because different areas have also different resources. And some areas will have biogas because they have a surplus of things to make biogas from, and other areas will have a surplus of something else that they can use also.
Absolutely. They should use local stocks and their resources.
But if you look at the economy itself, like the economy is also a reflection of how we see ourselves as human beings. So like currently, like rational economic man is like the reflection of ourselves. I think one of the big enablers is if we start looking at ourselves in a different way. Maybe the COVID pandemic is a massive enabler like that, because it really reveals that we're quite altruistic animals. So it's also the stories that we tell about ourselves and how we view ourselves that need to change, and that then will be reflected in a new and better economy.
Yeah, I'd like to just pick up on that myself, because I think you're right, Emma, it's crucial. It's about not just about language, but it's about, yes, the narrative we have about a better future. We need to have a narrative about a better future that people can support. And what we've been missing for a long time is the story of the future. The story of the future has always been, it's a bit like now, but we'll tweak it. That's being shown to be pretty inadequate. So for me too, the major enabler is sharing a narrative that we can get behind, which has enough general direction in it to make sense, but does not need to have all the detail before you do it. And I think that's one of the things I picked up here. It's pretty easy to spot the problems or the lack of detail or precision, but we're not dealing with a precision instrument. We're dealing with an economy which is rough and ready, you know? And that's for me, one of the big enablers, and also the biggest challenge, because the challenge is that people won't give up on the story they already have.
Yeah, and the narrative could be adapted by incontinence and even locally, but it has to fit the local culture, the local beliefs, I suppose.
But I think if I can add to that, I think also from our discussion with the system perspective, it's like that's also an enabler and a challenge in many ways. Like just this idea of that we don't really understand all the interrelations between things. We can't really, give a clear top-down instruction about what to do, and still we need to do something, and it opens up new ways of dealing with these kinds of problems and looking for these intervention points that might have great effects. But I do believe that there is a challenge here in trying to get that understanding into something that's actionable for people out in the real world, because I think a lot of people, when they hear this, don't really know what to do with it. And also it's easy to say when we see solutions that, oh, they didn't consider the system, there were all these adverse effects that we didn't think about. And then what we say is that we should experiment and learn from the experimentation. But that's also a big challenge in itself, right? Especially on the policy level. How can we experiment with policy in a useful and effective way? Also considering that we often, as Marianne said, end up with suboptimal policies.
Yeah. I wonder if in part of this, we can be happy enough with suboptimal policies if it told us something about how to, as we use the experience and the practice, tune it up. Because economics shouldn't come out of a box ready wrapped, ready designed, because in a way that's what we've been living with. That comment from Cameron, I think it was, about economics is taught as if nothing had changed in the last 50 years, and that's an incredible indictment of any discipline in a way, because it's saying you have to take the pre-pack arrangement and you have to fit the world to the pre-pack arrangement. What sort of scientific approach is that? We're taught, aren't we, to engage with the world and use our intellectual and scientific tools to help make sense of it, not to say the world has to fit my theory all the time.
But
so
I think
that's interesting. Walter?
That is also the inertia in academia, because if you have a professor in economics or any other topic, he wants to teach what he has learned and what he believes in he doesn't want to change his beliefs every 10 years and adapt it to reality. And I think in that sense, in technical academia, the change is much more brutal, because if you don't change, then you're out. But in economics or philosophy, there is an inertia that sometimes is justified in a philosophy, for example. But in economics, economics should reflect the reality, not the other way around.
And perhaps does that bring us back to science? Because a number of contributions in the last couple of days have made this emphasis on, we're looking at complex adaptive systems, or maybe we're using metaphors from living systems. You know, it's much more this systems interdependent. You get patterns, you don't get things you can define tightly. And you see a lot of the language in people like McDonough and Braungart. It's about a nutrient economy now. It's about metabolisms. It's about rebuilding capitals, which is one of your top things. The language that we use to describe or to illustrate the thinking is perhaps moving more and more towards the biology/ecology end of things. Braungart always says you have to feed the forest to feed the trees. I often quote that, and I think it's useful because it says we're all better off when we're all better off. And people have seem to have lost that connection with the nested part of systems, as though we could draw a tight boundary of it around it, work on it as if it was a machine, and get a guaranteed result. I mean, that was 19th century mechanistic thinking. This is 21st century, and we have to be working with complex systems. So it is a little frustrating that sometimes one is asked to think in a mechanistic way about something which is clearly using very different frameworks for thinking. I don't know what other people think, Walter.
Well, if you look at astrophysics, astrophysicians are normally the one people that don't have any fixed ideas, because the universe is, the knowledge about the universe is exploding. 25 years ago, somebody discovered an exoplanet. In the meantime, we know there are 4,000 exoplanets, and we discovered black holes. And the astrophysics is one area where people admit they don't know it all. But in economics, I think the belief is that it is an exact science.
Yeah, I would say that we might be being a little cruel, because there are people like Eric Beinhocker and others who are very much systems economists, but they're not really center stage. Let's pick, sorry, Mariana, you want to come in on this?
Yes, I do. I was just going to say, thinking back to the previous keynote of Anders, who was saying, I think it was that one, where they were discussing how universities are really silo thinking. So this idea of a systems economist still is an economist, but you get people who are economists, they're engineers, they're this, they're that, and they're not people who are generalists. I mean, the people in universities are specialists. And then that's a little bit where you get some problems arising.
Yeah, I know that personally, because I'm a generalist, okay, and I'm in a university at the moment, but people think, well, you're a generalist, so what sort of creature are you really? You must have a specialism somewhere. You must be hiding it, but no, I don't. And that is that difficulty connecting through to more general, to generalisms, because it's just not valued. For a couple of years before I joined my current job, I went to meetings and said I was a generalist. You got some very strange looks, because it's like, what are you doing here? We don't have a role for a generalist in this meeting. I mean, where I'm working now is pretty tolerant and engaging, because we're working across some disciplines, but it is a typical response that you're not needed because you're not a specialist. I don't know if that experience is more generalizable because it was brought up about higher education.
Yeah, but I think in general, if I can reflect back to the policy session this morning, everybody had many ideas of different policies. When they're talking about policy packages and policy mixes, they were thinking about many different things that needed to change. So it was the public procurement and the design and the measures here and the consumer measures. So it's just to come back, this sort of generalism and maybe the diversity which you, Emma, were talking about in the beginning, that we need. There's no one silver bullet. Lots of change are needed on different levels. Yes, sorry, I just want to point out something. I just noticed that Sonia arrived in the conversation. Maybe she would like to share something from her panel.
I would just suggest before you do, Sonia, that we well, join in where you like, but we're in a sort of a general flow about universities, narratives, language, metaphor, and it might be quite a surprise just to land in on this discussion and be asked to.
I would say continue the discussion for now, and we can maybe
join in when.
Yep.
I don't think we'll go backwards to the detail. No, we'll keep flowing. Emma, you were mentioned. I'm sorry, I probably cut off you wanted to respond to this flow or to pick up on point.
So like you were talking about like generalists and people with very specific expertise. I think this time is maybe just a little bit of an awkward time for very specific experts. Like, what if you're very much an expert in rentier capitalism? This must be a very awkward time because we're changing towards a different paradigm. And I think we should make a distinction between like the transition and actually when we are, in a circular economy, because I just think that like currently there's so much changing and there are so many different ideas of, how the world should look, how we are as humans and how the economy should operate, that it does require this, big picture. But I think once we're there, there's much more room for, like very specific expertise. It feels like we're, currently we're playing Monopoly and there's someone being like, no, I'm not enjoying this game, but we continue to play while we're trying to come up with a different game. And once we're in the different game, it would be much easier.
Yeah, you do know, and I know you know, because Monopoly was designed to show the opposite of what it shows if you play it under the current rules. It was designed to show that everybody could be well off if everybody was well off.
Yeah, now it teaches an entire generation how to operate in a linear economy.
Yeah, an extractive economy. So, the mindset's absolutely crucial. And that's one example. Virtually nobody knows that the game was designed around the ideas of Henry George, which was to tax increasing the value of land. So that's how crucial it can be. You can have tools which point you in a really, really odd direction if you don't know the framework which you're operating on.
Yeah, and that's why I mean that like currently it might be a bit more, the discussion might be a bit more comfortable with generalists that are looking at the bigger picture. But once we're there, we need to look at, what the specific implications are. And these discussions are really valid about, what are the very specific enablers and policy. But the answer is probably it depends, and it will still remain a bit vague for a while, I think. But it's not an excuse for not having that debate, of course.
I mean, governments should be generalists, keeping the big picture, the systemic picture in mind, and then using specialists, experts on specific issues. But very often, I'm not going to quote anybody, very often it's the experts that then convince the politicians what the right solution is. But the expert never sees the whole picture. And the picture I've used in my last book is a pyramid. If you want to see the whole problem, the whole issue in a systemic way, you have to go to the top of the pyramid. And then you can see all four sides and even far the horizon, but you cannot see the details. So if you want to see the details of a problem, you have to go down to the bottom of the pyramid, and then you can study the details, but then you have completely lost the general view. And so we should have this going up and down the pyramid, going back up to see what's happening, and then going down to the bottom to study the specific problems.
I wanted to add something a bit, not exactly about that, but more in general. So I think sometimes also maybe we're making it a little bit easy for ourselves by saying that, you know, it's like we're preaching that people should have a more of a systemic view on things. And I think it's actually already happening. And I don't think all economists are looking at the economy as a machine anymore. I think there is progress in this. And especially in companies, you see a lot of people saying, we have a lot of uncertainty. We don't know what we're going to do, but we're going to try something out. So maybe as a multidisciplinary research community, I just wanted to say that I think one of our goals can really be to try and, you know, facilitate this exploration and create the tools to do this, because I think a lot of practitioners out there are interested in that and want to do this. It's not only about, you know, telling them that they should, but also about just helping them.
Yeah, I'm conscious of time, folks. Walter, I don't have it in front of me, the concluding time for this. I think it's about now.
It's 18 hours, yes.
Yeah, so it is about now.
Precisely, yes.
All right, so shall we conclude that there and move into the wrap-up session?
The closing ceremony, please do.
Yeah, Mattias and gang.
Yes, Ken.
Okay. Right, I just have to, I've got one simple slide I wanted to use. I think that helps, and I'm pretty sure that Conny is joining me on this. Yes, there you are, Conny. Right.
Hello.
Hi there. So we've come to the end of two very varied and interesting days, and it's been fascinating, both because we were experimenting with different formats, different ways of getting involved, but also to have a very broad range of people involved. Now, I just want to say a couple of concluding remarks about the society and where we might be going. And I have a single slide just because it helps me remember what to mention. Now I'm going to share my screen. If I can. Yep, just give me that chance. There we go. There we are. Simple screen. I'm going to look at the left-hand side, and Connie's going to pick up on some other elements. Where are we at the moment? Well, the ambition was to provide a useful, scalable set of tools, web tools and other things, to enable a society to be able to pick it up and grow out, to scale up and scale out. And I think we have done that. The tools are always being improved and amended. These couple of days have been very helpful to the web team in being able to find out where issues arise, and the feedback has enabled some changes even during these couple of days. The other function of this initiative was to demonstrate that the demand for a society to have discussions around pushing the boundaries of the subject, bringing people together. And as we've understood in the last couple of days, we've explored novel online formats. Even in the original conference design, which was face-to-face, there was a strong online element because it really does help provide the last result on my list of 4 here, which is an accessible conference. It's relatively low cost and it is flexible. Okay, time zones and other contingencies of living on a rather round planet which continually moves. Not worrying about that too much, but at least there's an accessible conference to people there. And I would like to just move on to what might be next. And Conny, can you pick up on a couple of things here?
I'll have definitely pick up on a couple of points. I actually have 3. They move from the short term to the longer term. Firstly, evaluation. So I don't know about you, but this was my very first completely online conference. And it did take me a bit of time to get used to this format. What I liked about it is that it allows for a much more inclusive conference without all the flying around. So we had one participant, for instance, who was up at 4 a.m. in order to join. And I really commend her for that. Really cool. But we would also very much like to get your feedback on how we might organize the next conference. So should it again be a fully online, or should we move to a hybrid format where we get the best of both worlds, both online and somewhere on site? So we want to send out a request for feedback over the next few days, and maybe just asking what went well and what should be improved, and how should we, if we are going to organize the next conference, how should we go about? That was my first point. My second point is about, on the slightly longer term, a great initiative offered by Katie Whalen. And she suggested that she would like to host a series of longer webinars drawing from the work of the conference. And these may offer an opportunity to dive a bit deeper into specific topics touched upon in the past couple of days. And so thank you very much, Katie, for volunteering this. And I'm sure that we would very much appreciate and like to support this where we can. And finally, on the much longer term, we will be thinking about the next conference of the society. And we have quite a few decisions to make here. So just thinking about the when and the how and the where. So if you feel like thinking along with us, please drop us a line. And we are very open to volunteers and positive ideas. I think it's definitely necessary that we do this more often. I very much enjoyed it, and I hope you did too. So maybe, Ken, you can say a few more things about the International Society and where this will go next.
Yeah. I will do it just by having notes here. I think the next immediate steps, having achieved that initial target, are to first build IS4CE's formal organization and the community of researchers. We've done this very much on colleagues like yourselves and Mattias and others coming together, and Peter Hopkinson and Fiona Charnley coming together to say, let's get something rolling, and then we will go into the more formal organization of it. So the idea is to have a company limited by guarantee, it's called in the UK. It's basically a charitable function that then is driven by its members' agendas. So it's very much a membership-driven group, and we would then set up the opportunities for people to be able to vote, to participate, to elect officers, and the power would shift from what was a useful but temporary structure to one that's enabled to allow us to do a global reach, including different languages and networks, and we can harness, as you said, volunteer contributions and social media and the various possibly supporting organizations who might want to work along with us. So I think that's important, and there will be this slight pause, if you like, in the next few weeks while we generate feedback from yourselves. We'll be writing to you, and we will have a draft structure around how the membership and other internal organizational elements might work. And we really do need your feedback, because it's your society in the end, and that's what will make it thrive. We've made decisions at the moment on a practical basis, but the longer term one, it is a membership society. That's what I wanted to sort of bring in about what's the next strategic steps. They're more building formal organizations and extending the community of researchers. And as you've said, we're very open to offers about holding next year's conference, about support. We'd like to hear that. And I think now is exactly the right time to be a member of this society, because it's small enough to get involved. It will be a growing organization. We've got the tools to let us expand. And if you want to be involved in it, importantly, and help develop it, now's the time, rather than saying a year down the line, well, I wish I got involved because it's going in this direction and I wanted my voice heard so that it might go there. You know, now's the time to influence its direction. Is that enough, Conny? I wonder about is that direct?
Maybe I should, Mattias, Lindahl here. I would like just to add, in order to get a little bit more structure, because we're really happy to get all your feedback, and I'm really happy to see that many of you participating during a few days. I think we will put together it into a questionnaire, so we summarize all questions. You will get the questionnaire from us within the coming days, and please add in your feedback, because it's very, very useful for us. And I would also like, I mean, this is the first time we are doing this conference, but under very, very strange conditions. So I hope it has worked with YouTube and the Zoom sessions. Would like to get your feedback about that. We have learned a lot of things how to do this, but I would also like to thank my sidekicks here, Per Telias and Therese Appelkis for supporting me here in the back office. And yes, I will hand over to you again, but thanks for participating.
Indeed.
Can I say thanks from my end?
Yeah.
Is that okay? Can I? Yeah, okay. So I would like to very much thank the TU Delft team for helping. So Sonja, Emilia, and Marit, great job. And I so much enjoyed watching you chair these sessions. Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, so it's more thank yous time, but they're very necessary. I'd like to be able to thank all of the technical side, Mattias's group, and as you say, your facilitators group, Conny, and the other people I know who have helped facilitate the sessions. There are the keynote speakers, of course. We had a pretty star quality collection of keynotes that set us up exactly right, because one of the aims in the future is to make sure we have impact and quality. So we will need to maintain and extend that level of discussion. So many thanks to the keynotes for help providing that sense of where we're aspiring to. On a practical sense, I'd like to thank, and they're all listed on the website under acknowledgements. I can't remember exactly everybody in the advisory group, but there was a strong advisory group that pitched in the early development days. There is the web team, the website's built. There are, of course, the Centre for Circular Economy at Exeter with Peter Hopkinson and Fiona Charnley. And they used to say on radio, and everybody else who knows me at some of these points. So with the usual apology that I will have forgotten somebody, but the people we won't forget are the members and people who have attended here over the last couple of days and worked with us. And as Mattias says, we'll be putting together quite a structured questionnaire to help us get the right sort of feedback, which is your feedback about what happens next. Look out for an announcement about Katie's webinar series, and if you want to be on it, you want to offer yourself, or you want to recommend somebody, because there are all of these videos that we have with introductions, make yourself known, as I think they would probably say. So I think I'm going to get out while the going's good. My particular thanks to Conny, Mattias, Walter, Anders, Martin Stuckty, Tima Bansel, and all the rest. and Materium and Biome on the material side as well. And could I wish you a good night or a good evening or a good morning, whatever it is for you.
And
Thanks
Ken, a
very
big
much.
applause to you, because you
Yeah.
were actually the instigator, and without you, we wouldn't have had this conference at all. So, yay!
So we'll do an
applause.
applause for the rest.
Yay!
Thank you, Ken.
Okay, thanks everyone. Goodbye for
Next
now.
time.